Shadows can conceal a multitude of sins, but they cannot hide a woman from a man trained to see everything. Samantha built a fortress of oversized sweaters to mask her heavy, plus-size body from a cruel world. But when Chicago's most ruthless syndicate boss walked into her office, he didn't see a wallflower. He saw an obsession. Rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of Caldwell Financial, casting long, dreary shadows across the polished mahogany floors of the Chicago accounting firm. At a corner desk, deliberately tucked behind a row of filing cabinets, sat Samantha Brooks. By society's harsh standards, Samantha was fat, a fact she was violently aware of every waking second of her life. She was a size 24, carrying heavy, soft curves, thick thighs, and a wide, rolling stomach that she desperately tried to camouflage. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of men's 3XL Carhartt hoodies, shapeless thrifted trench coats, and dark, wide-leg slacks that swallowed her lower half. She didn't just wear baggy clothes, she used them as armor. If she was swallowed by fabric, nobody could perceive the space she actually took up. She could remain invisible. Her invisibility was her superpower in the corporate world. While the senior partners strutted around in Brioni suits and the receptionists gossiped in tight pencil skirts, Samantha crunched numbers with lethal precision. She was the firm's top forensic accountant, a bloodhound with a spreadsheet. Yet she shrank into her oversized garments whenever anyone walked by, hunching her shoulders to collapse her heavy chest inward, praying no one would look at her long enough to formulate an insult. "Brooks, we need the offshore ledgers for the Vanguard account," snapped Richard Lawson, a senior partner with a penchant for cheap cologne and stealing credit. He didn't even look at her, dropping a heavy stack of manila folders onto her desk. "And don't spill your lunch on them. The client is coming in at noon, and this guy isn't someone who accepts apologies." Samantha nodded silently, her cheeks flushing as she pulled the thick wool of her oversized black cardigan tighter around her broad hips. She didn't know who the Vanguard client was. The account had always been shrouded in layers of LLCs and blind trusts. But as she began cross-referencing the wire transfers routed through the Cayman Islands and an obscure bank in Malta, her heart began to hammer against her ribs. There was a glaring discrepancy. $3 million had been systematically siphoned off over 18 months, buried in microscopic accounting errors, disguised as fluctuating exchange rates. Someone within Caldwell Financial was bleeding the Vanguard account dry. At exactly 12 o'clock, the atmosphere in the office changed. The usual hum of keyboards and ringing phones ceased entirely. The heavy glass doors of the lobby swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Cassius Romano did not walk into a room. He claimed it. He was a man chiseled from violence and bespoke Italian tailoring, the heir to the most brutal organized crime syndicate in the Midwest. His dark, calculating eyes swept over the terrified employees of Caldwell Financial like a predator assessing a pen of trembling sheep. Flanked by two massive men whose suits bulged suspiciously at the ribs, Cassius moved directly toward the glass-walled conference room. Samantha kept her head down, her fingers trembling over her keyboard. She wanted nothing more than to sink through the floorboards. But her desk phone buzzed, the harsh sound making her jump. "Get in the conference room, now! Bring the Vanguard files!" Richard hissed through the receiver, his voice tight with an unfamiliar panic. Swallowing hard, Samantha gathered the folders. She stood, instinctively tugging at the hem of her massive sweater, ensuring it draped all the way down to her mid-thigh, hiding the curve of her stomach and the width of her hips. She kept her eyes glued to the floor as she pushed open the heavy glass door of the boardroom. The silence inside was suffocating. Richard stood sweating at the head of the table. Cassius sat casually in a leather chair, exuding a terrifying stillness. "Mr. Romano, this is our lead auditor," Richard stammered, gesturing weakly to Samantha. "She handles the minute details." Cassius slowly turned his head. His gaze locked onto Samantha. It wasn't the dismissive, pitying look she received from most men. It was piercing, analytical, and unnervingly thorough. He didn't look at her face first. His eyes tracked the strange, bulky drape of her clothing. He noticed the way she nervously gripped the oversized sleeves, the way the thick wool gathered awkwardly over a chest that was clearly substantial, the way her wide studs betrayed the heavy curves hidden beneath the yards of excessive fabric. He saw exactly what she was doing. He saw the beautiful, terrified woman hiding inside a tent of anxiety. "You found something," Cassius said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in the quiet room. It wasn't a question. Samantha swallowed her fear, forcing herself to look at his expensive silk tie rather than his face. "Yes, sir. I found a recurring anomaly in the Maltese accounts. Someone has been skimming. $3,240,000. It's been funneled into a domestic shell company, registered in Delaware." Richard turned ghost white. "Samantha, what are you talking about? Those are standard transit fees." "Quiet," Cassius commanded softly. He didn't even glance at Richard. His dark eyes remained fixed on Samantha, watching the slight tremble of her soft, full lips. "Show me." Samantha stepped forward, her baggy clothes swishing around her thick thighs. She placed the ledger on the table, pointing a shaking finger at the highlighted columns. Cassius leaned in. He was close enough that she could smell him. Cedar, expensive musk, and something dangerous and metallic. As he reviewed the numbers, his arm brushed against hers. Even through the thick, bulky wool of her sweater, the contact sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. "Brilliant," Cassius murmured, finally looking up. His face was mere inches from hers. He looked past her double chin, past the defensive posture, straight into her wide, panicked eyes. "You have a very sharp mind, Miss Brooks," she whispered, stepping back quickly, desperate to put distance between them, to hide herself again in the shadows of the room. "Samantha Brooks." Cassius stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Pack your things, Miss Brooks. You no longer work for Caldwell Financial." Richard gasped. "Mr. Romano, you can't just—" "I'm moving my accounts," Cassius interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "And I am taking the only person in this building who isn't trying to rob me. Miss Brooks works for me now." 2 days later, Samantha found herself standing in the cavernous, oak-paneled library of the Romano estate in Lake Forest. The sprawling mansion was a fortress of wealth and paranoia, surrounded by 10-foot wrought-iron gates and patrolled by men who never smiled. She had been given a desk in the corner of Cassius's private study, surrounded by decades of handwritten ledgers, digital hard drives, and encrypted tax documents. She was terrified, not just of the men with guns, but of Cassius himself. He spent hours at his mahogany desk, seemingly working on his own laptops. But every time Samantha looked up, she felt the heavy, suffocating weight of his stare. He was watching her, not with disgust, but with a quiet, burning intensity that made her skin prickle. To cope with her mounting anxiety, she had doubled down on her armor. Today, she wore a pair of men's XL tactical trousers and a heavy navy blue fisherman's sweater that could easily fit a linebacker. She was sweating profusely in the climate-controlled room, her thick thighs chafing under the heavy fabric as she shifted uncomfortably in her leather chair, but she refused to shed a single layer. Taking off the sweater meant exposing the tight, white camisole beneath, which clung mercilessly to her back rolls, her heavy breasts, and the deep curve of her belly. "You're overheating," Cassius noted, without looking up from his screen. Samantha froze, her pen hovering over a ledger. "I'm fine, Mr. Romano." "You're sweating, Samantha. Take off the sweater." It was a command, softly spoken but laced with absolute authority. "I run cold," she lied, her voice cracking slightly. She crossed her thick arms over her chest, hugging herself protectively. "I prefer to keep it on." Cassius finally stopped typing. He closed his laptop with a quiet click and leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. "Who made you feel like you have to bury yourself alive?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, her heart thudding violently in her chest. "I don't know what you're talking about. I have spent my entire life reading people. It keeps me alive," Cassius said, rising slowly from his desk. He began to cross the room toward her, his footsteps silent on the Persian rug. "I know when a man is lying about money. I know when a man is holding a weapon. And I know when a woman is wearing 60 pounds of excess wool because she is terrified of taking up space in a room." He stopped right in front of her desk. Samantha looked down at her hands, tears of pure humiliation stinging the corners of her eyes. She hated her body. She hated the fat that hung from her arms, the thick, heavy rolls of her stomach, the sheer width of her silhouette. "Please, just let me do my job," she whispered, a tear escaping and slipping down her round cheek. Before she could react, Cassius reached across the desk. His large, calloused hand gently wiped the tear from her skin. His touch was shockingly tender. "You're hiding from the world, Samantha, but you can't hide from me." Just then, the heavy oak doors of the study burst open. It was Arthur, one of Cassius's top lieutenants, his face bruised and his suit torn. "Boss, we have a problem. The O'Brien crew just hit the warehouse at the seaport, and they know about the accountant." Cassius's entire demeanor shifted in a microsecond. The gentle observer vanished, replaced by a cold-blooded killer. He turned to Arthur. "How do they know about her?" "Lawson," Arthur spat. "Richard Lawson was the one skimming for them. He panicked when you took the girl and the files. He tipped the O'Briens off. They know she has the ledgers that trace the stolen money back to their front companies. They're coming for her." Panic seized Samantha's chest. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. The O'Briens. The Irish. They were known for leaving nothing but scorched earth behind. "We need to move her to the safe house," Cassius said, his voice hard. He turned back to Samantha. "Grab the hard drive. Leave the paper files." Samantha scrambled to stand, her heavy body moving as fast as her panic would allow. In her frantic rush, the oversized hem of her fisherman's sweater caught violently on the heavy brass handle of the desk drawer. She yanked forward, trying to break free, but the thick yarn held fast. With a sickening ripping sound, the sweater snagged and tore, pulling heavily against her neck. "Wait," Cassius said, stepping forward. But Samantha was in full flight or fight mode. Desperate to get away, she pulled her arms out of the restrictive sleeves and pulled the heavy sweater over her head, abandoning it on the handle. She stood frozen in the middle of the study. She was wearing only the thin, tight white camisole. There was nowhere to hide. The thin fabric clung desperately to her massive chest, pulling taut over the deep, soft curve of her fat belly. Her wide, heavy hips and thick waist were on full display above the waistband of the men's trousers, the deep indentation of her belly button visible through the cheap cotton. She squeezed her eyes shut, crossing her thick arms over her stomach, bracing for the look of disgust, the sneer of repulsion she had seen 1,000 times from men when they finally saw her actual size. The room was dead silent. Arthur had already stepped out into the hall to secure the perimeter. Samantha opened her eyes, tears spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. Cassius was staring at her. But it wasn't disgust twisting his sharp, handsome features. His eyes were dark, dilated, and completely arrested. His gaze slowly tracked from the heavy, soft swell of her breasts down to the lush, wide curve of her hips. He looked at her not like she was a monster, but like a starving man who had just found a banquet. I took a slow step toward her, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl that made her knees weak. Never put that hideous sweater on again. Before she could process the raw, unapologetic heat in his eyes, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the ground floor, followed instantly by the deafening crack of automatic gunfire. The O'Briens were already inside. Gunfire echoed through the sprawling Lake Forest mansion, the brutal staccato of automatic weapons shattering the expensive tranquility of the estate. Cassius moved with terrifying speed. Before Samantha could even draw a breath to scream, he lunged across the space between them, his massive hands gripping her thick upper arms. He practically lifted her off her feet, dragging her behind the heavy mahogany desk, just as a spray of bullets pulverized the antique stained glass window above them. Glass rained down on the Persian rug like deadly hail. Samantha squeezed her eyes shut, her heavy chest heaving against the thin cotton of her camisole. She was trembling uncontrollably, her soft, fleshy arms wrapping defensively around her wide stomach. Cassius knelt over her, shielding her vulnerable body with his own. He shrugged off his bespoke Tom Ford suit jacket and draped it over her trembling shoulders. The expensive dark wool settled over her deep cleavage and wide back, carrying his scent of cedar and gunpowder. "Keep your head down," Cassius ordered, drawing a sleek, customized Glock 19 from a shoulder holster. His dark eyes flicked over her panicked face, softening for just a fraction of a second. "I will not let them touch you. Do you understand, Samantha?" Tears streamed down her round cheeks, but she managed a frantic nod. The heavy oak doors of the study splintered inward. 2 men rushed in, dressed in dark tactical gear. Assault rifles raised. Cassius didn't hesitate. He rose in a fluid, lethal motion, firing 3 rapid shots. Both men dropped instantly to the hard wood floor, lifeless before they even registered they had been hit. "Arthur, secure the rear exit!" Cassius roared into a secure earpiece, grabbing Samantha's hand. "We are moving to the garage. Now!" Cassius pulled her up. Samantha's heavy thighs burned as she forced herself into a dead sprint. The men's tactical trousers she wore were hopelessly unbelted, slipping low on her wide hips. But she didn't care. She clung to Cassius's hand, and as if it were a lifeline. They bolted down the service corridor, the sound of shouting and gunfire echoing from the grand foyer. They burst into the underground garage, a cavernous space filled with a fleet of black, armored Cadillac Escalades. Arthur was already there, laying down suppressing fire toward the stairwell, while the engine of a modified SUV roared to life. "Get in the back!" Cassius shoved Samantha roughly but safely into the rear seat of the Escalade before diving in after her. Arthur slammed the door shut and stomped on the gas. The massive vehicle tore out of the garage, smashing through the estate's wrought-iron rear gates and rocketing into the dark, rain-slicked streets of suburban Chicago. Inside the SUV, the silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the powerful engine and Samantha's ragged breathing. She sat huddled in the corner of the plush leather seat, clutching Cassius's jacket tightly around her soft, rolling curves. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. "Why are they doing this?" Samantha choked out, her voice trembling. "It's just an accounting discrepancy. It's just money." Cassius was reloading a fresh magazine into his weapon, his face carved from granite. "It is never just money. Richard Lawson didn't just tip off the O'Brien syndicate." Arthur intercepted